She was hung for stealing a synth loaf, until the exiled human cut the plasma rope and said, "Eat first." Virilia 7 was never meant to snow. The colony moon had once bloomed with green domes and artificial rivers, built by Earth's best terraformers to mimic spring in Oslo or a summer in Montana. But after the flare storms and the silence from Earth, everything fell. Now the wind carved through the steel ruins like it was trying to erase the memory of warmth. Ilara's bare feet crunched over powdered frost and broken synth glass as they dragged her through the temple corridor. 2 Zeratai guards at each side, their silver armor hissing with heat to keep out the cold. Her wrists were bound with glowing blue filament, tight enough to burn patterns into her hybrid skin. Her jaw clenched, lips cracked, and a pale mist rose from her breath every time she exhaled. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. They said she stole a ration loaf, 1 synth-baked brick of protein, nutrient gel, and minerals. It wasn't true. Or maybe it was. The boy beneath the rail station had been coughing blood. She hadn't stayed long enough to see if he lived. Now she would hang for it. The great cryo-temple loomed like a hollowed skeleton above the execution square, its once smooth domes now fractured with ice veins. Inside, the floor was polished black frost. Citizens gathered silently under a broken skylight that had once projected the Earth flag. Now it just let in the snow. High Counselor Threx stood in ceremonial robes at the altar, 4 eyes half-lidded, his voice oily as it echoed through the temple's cold acoustics. Hybrid Ilara, accused of food theft under the Resource Purity Code, sentence purification. A plasma rope descended from the beam above, vibrating softly in the frozen air, glowing violet. It wasn't a rope. It was a filament of energy that would slice through her spine in under a second, not break her neck like in old Earth hangings. More efficient, they said. More merciful. The crowd didn't speak. Most of them were alien, some fully armored, some cloaked against the wind. But a few humans stood in the back rows, eyes lowered, faces unreadable. They wouldn't intervene. They knew better. Ilara was lifted onto the execution slab. Her knees trembled, but her spine stayed straight. The noose hissed toward her throat. The wind slammed the temple doors open. Snow blasted inward in a violent swirl, scattering prayer leaves and data scrolls across the floor. People gasped. A shape appeared in the storm outside, tall, heavy-coated, unmoved by the gale. He stepped in. A man, human. He pulled back his hood, and the snow clung to his shoulders like ash. His face was lined with age and firelight. His left eye glinted silver, an old augmentation. His coat was torn at the hem, scorched from blast burns, but across his back was a sheath no one had seen in years. A molecular blade. The guard stepped forward. He didn't draw the weapon, didn't speak. He reached into his coat, and instead of a gun, he pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle, still steaming. A synth loaf. He walked up the temple stairs as if the cold did not exist. The counselor hissed, stepping back. The plasma rope sparked, still hovering inches from Ilara's skin. The man looked at her, not with pity, not with fear, but with something she hadn't seen in years, recognition. Then calmly, he unsheathed the blade. It shimmered violet, humming softly, carved with resistance sigils from the last war. He lifted it, and in one smooth stroke, sliced through the plasma rope. It flickered and snapped, dying instantly. Ilara collapsed forward, but never hit the stone. The man caught her. She gasped, and her eyes met his. He didn't ask her name. He placed the warm synth loaf into her bound hands. Then, and only then, did he speak. If starvation is your justice, his voice deep, level, carved from sorrow, then you've all forgotten what sin really is. No one spoke. The guards didn't move. The man turned, still holding her steady, and walked back into the snowstorm with her in his arms. His name passed like wind through the crowd. Ronan Vale, the exile, the one they said was dead. But dead men don't walk into the council's temple and cut ropes like gods. And dead men don't carry starving girls into the storm. The wind didn't stop screaming until they were at least 5 kilometers out. deep into the frost trench where the last of the geothermal vents still breathed warmth beneath the surface. Alara didn't remember falling asleep. One moment her head lay against a stranger's shoulder, Ronan's, and the next, a wave of synthetic heat washed over her cheeks. Her body shivered violently, rebelling as the blood returned to her limbs. Then she felt it. Soft bedding, real cloth, firelight dancing on dark steel walls. She jerked upright, her vision blurred. The hum of a plasma door echoed behind her, locking shut. Was this a holding cell? A trap? No, the warmth wasn't fake. The scent wasn't synthetic. It was real. Burned wood, steam from broth, melted snow evaporating on the hot metal. She looked around. The room was tight but clean. Metal beams curved above, etched with human words and resistance glyphs. At the far end, a hexagonal vent poured warmth into the space. Along the wall, a hanging rifle, an old droid head repurposed into a lantern, a folded woolen cloak draped over a hook. Every object was placed with intention. There were 2 chairs at the round metal table. Only one was dust-covered. The other had a dent where someone had sat for years. And someone else hadn't. Her gaze caught movement. Ronan stood over a stove, turning a ladle slowly in a pot. His coat was off now. Beneath it, a reinforced exo-mesh vest clung to his frame, faded scars running from his neck to his collarbone. Battle wounds, old and violent. His left arm twitched when he moved, likely nerve damage. He didn't speak, didn't even glance her way. After a few minutes, he set a bowl in front of her. Then another. He tore a piece of synth bread in half and placed one on her side of the table. No words, no rules, just food. Alara stared at it. The aroma hit her like a drug. Her stomach cramped. Still, she hesitated. Why are you doing this? Her voice rasped, barely a whisper. You don't even know me. Ronan finally looked at her, eyes shadowed but steady. You are going to die for a loaf of bread, he said simply. That's all I needed to know. She ate, first with her fingers shaking, then faster. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Salt touched her tongue, warm broth soothed the ache in her chest, and then quietly she wept. Not sobs, just tears falling without permission. Ronan said nothing, but when she finished, he slid the other half of his bread toward her. She blinked. You didn't eat. I already did. She didn't believe him. Later that night, after her muscles had stopped cramping, she wandered the shelter. She found an old earth mirror, cracked but clean, her face sunken, frost-bitten around the lips, a bruise blooming on her collarbone where the plasma rope had hovered. Her wrist bore the burn rings from the Zeratai cuffs. She ran her fingers over them. In a small alcove near the side bunk, she found a comb, wooden, handmade. It had a single initial burned into its edge. L. She didn't touch it. She backed away slowly. On the far wall, beside a locked panel, hung a photograph. Real paper. She hadn't seen one in years. A woman, alien by origin, with pale blue skin and a smile that could melt iron. She was holding hands with a man. Ronan. Alara stared, then whispered, You lost her. A creak behind her. She turned. He was there. Ronan leaned against the doorframe, watching her without judgment. He didn't scold her for snooping. She held his gaze, arms crossed tight. You live alone. His silence said more than words. She hesitated. I didn't steal that loaf for myself. Still no response. There's a boy, she continued, stepping closer to the fire. Human, I think. Maybe hybrid. He lives under the crash rails beneath the supply tracks. His mother died weeks ago. He was drinking coolant snow when I found him, trying to trick his stomach. Ronan lowered himself into the empty chair, shoulders heavy. His hand rested on the table, like a soldier surrendering a blade. I begged the ration officer, Alara said. They laughed, called me spawn filth. I took one loaf, but they said I took 100. She clenched her fists. I knew they'd kill me, but I couldn't walk back to him empty-handed. The fire crackled. She expected silence. Instead, Ronan reached into his coat and placed something on the table. A small, hard crust of bread, wrapped in wax cloth. "After lunch," he said, voice low, "I'll show you how to split frostwood. Not because I need help, but so you'll have the strength to ride if you ever choose to leave." Alara stared at the crust. Her lip trembled. She touched it, and for the first time in years, she cried without shame. That night, Ronan rolled out a mat near the fire and gestured toward the single bed. "You take the bed," he said, matter of fact. She hesitated. "I'm not worth—" He cut her off, still facing away. "I once left someone behind," he said. "Someone I should have saved. I'm not making that mistake again." He placed a folded wooden comb on the bedside table. Not the old one, but a freshly carved piece still unfinished. She stared at it as he walked away. When she finally lay down, the sheets smelled of cedar. Warm, clean. She looked toward the firelight where he slept on his side, back turned, a plasma knife resting in his palm. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting. For ghosts or for danger, she didn't know. But she whispered into the dark, "I don't want to trust you, but I hope I can." And in that space between firelight and fear, she finally closed her eyes. The storm outside had calmed, but inside the geothermal refuge, something deeper began to stir. A quiet rumble that had nothing to do with wind or frost. It came in the shape of a letter, smuggled through the silence. Alara sat on the edge of the cot, Ronan's carved comb resting on her lap, untouched. Her fingers trembled, not from cold now, but from something else. Truth. Ronan stood by the blast door, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the small hexagonal drone that had descended earlier. It whirred low to the floor, its underbelly lit with blinking blue glyphs. From its cavity extended a thin, wrapped scroll, paper, real paper, not synthplast. Alara took it with both hands. The wax seal on the edge had a mark she remembered from her first factory job, MG. Her breath caught. "Mirith Glaive," she whispered. "A friend?" Ronan asked quietly. Alara unfolded the note. Her pulse kicked up like a war drum. "I know who really stole the Synth Loaf. It was Benel, Governor Dalton's son. He used the admin codes. I saw it. He made me stay quiet. Said he'd erased my family's name from the citizen registry. Be careful. If they know you're alive, they won't let it go. MG." The note fell from Alara's hands as if it burned. She stared at Ronan. Her voice shook. "They lied. They all lied. I took 1 loaf. Benel took 100. For trade with the outer smugglers. And I was the one the noose came for." Ronan didn't move. But something in his eyes turned sharp, like stone cracking. "They'll come for you now," she said. "You helped a traitor." "No," he replied. "I helped a girl who was starving." She stepped forward, urgent now. "But they'll say you broke into a council temple, assaulted guards, violated a judgment decree. I know what they'll say." His voice was low. "I know exactly how they lie." He turned and walked to the storage rack. Alara followed, unsure whether to run or brace for what came next. Ronan opened a sealed compartment with his biometric scan. The light inside cast everything in red. A combat-grade coat, weatherproof, armor-lined, a folded resistance armband, and a rifle, long matte black, etched in a dialect only old fighters remembered. He pulled it free. Loaded a charge core. Alara stepped back. "You're going to fight them?" Ronan glanced over his shoulder. "I'm going to warn them first." That day, he trained her. Not with words, but motion, rhythm, silence. How to split frostwood and make it burn twice. How to balance a rifle without bruising your shoulder. How to tie a skeleton harness even when your hands are numb. "You'll leave someday," he said while tightening the straps. "You should know how to survive without me." "I don't want to leave," she whispered. He didn't answer. But he paused longer than he meant to. In the evening, Ronan stood outside, cloak whipping in the rising wind. A thermal flare flickered in his fingers as he scanned the tree line. The frost was creeping in again early this year. Alara approached, carrying a tin cup of tea laced with root spice. She handed it to him without a word. "It's getting colder," she murmured. He nodded, sipped. A beat passed. Then she said, "I don't think I'll be leaving when the storm hits." His gaze didn't move from the horizon, but his chest rose, deeper this time. She saw it. He didn't say anything, but she saw it in his eyes. He believed her. And somehow that meant more than any vow. That night the cold sharpened. Inside, Alara mended one of Ronan's old coats, purple thread. Unusual choice, but it felt right in her fingers. He was crouched by the generator, adjusting a loose wire with his gloved hands. Neither spoke of the letter, or the boy hiding in the tunnels, or the governor's son who could erase them both with a single order. They just worked, because work meant you were alive. Later, as the firelight flickered, Ronan broke the silence. Her name was Lise. Alara looked up. "My wife." He sat back, arms heavy on his knees. His voice cracked, but not from pain. She wasn't human. Zeratai hybrid. Soft laugh. "Braver than I ever was." Alara said nothing. "They accused her of disloyalty. Said she was carrying a human child. I didn't believe it, but I didn't stop them either." He stared into the flames. "She caught fever during the blackout. They denied her med patches. Said she wasn't pure enough." He paused. "She died before I could say I believed her." Alara's eyes welled. "If you hadn't walked into that temple," she whispered, "I'd have been the second woman you left behind." Their eyes locked. No anger, just truth. He reached across the table, his calloused hand wrapping around hers. Gently, slowly. No need, no urgency. Just presence. Just a promise. She couldn't sleep that night. The shadows on the wall looked too much like ghosts. So she rose, wrapped a thermal shawl around her shoulders, stepped outside into the frost. Snowflakes fell in silence, soft and silver. They clung to her eyelashes like stardust. She stood there a long moment, then felt a blanket settle over her shoulders. Ronan stood beside her. No words. Only silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't demand anything. After a long while he spoke, not to break the silence, but to give it form. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," he said, "but if you stay, I won't let you go hungry. I won't let you be alone again." Alara turned to him, blinking back frozen tears. "Is that a promise?" He looked at her, steady, solemn. "It's the only thing I'm sure of." The snow whispered across the ridge. Inside, the fire crackled soft, and on the table, between two bowls of bread and broth, the smuggled letter still waited. Because the truth wasn't enough anymore. Justice had to follow. And the storm outside? It was just beginning. The dawn that rose over Virelia 7 was colorless, gray sky bleeding into frozen earth with no distinction. The wind didn't howl that morning. It whispered, low and tight, like something watching from the ridgelines, waiting to see who would flinch first. Ronan Vale didn't flinch. He wore the old coat now, the one stitched in lavender thread where the left sleeve had torn. The resistance rifle was slung across his back, and at his belt, his molecular blade. Charged, ready, silent. Alara rode beside him on a borrowed frost crawler, the smaller of the two beasts, her hands wrapped tight in synth-high gloves. Her braid fell over her shoulder. Her back was straight. The smuggled letter from Mirith Glaive sat in the pouch strapped to her thigh. Behind them, tethered to the pack sled with plasma cord, Benel Dalton lay slumped. His face was a mess of bruises, blood dried at the corner of his mouth. His coat bore the insignia of the governor's elite, but it hung in tatters now. His eyes were swollen half shut, but his mouth still worked. "You'll be erased for this," he croaked. "You think the council will believe her over me?" Alara didn't look at him. Ronan's jaw clenched. "We're not asking them to believe. We're asking them to listen. And if they don't, Then we make them. The tribunal dome hovered 5 meters off the ground, a floating fortress of glass and metal, constantly rotating to reflect the light that never fully broke through the clouds. A bridge of kinetic panels extended from the earth to its gates, glowing faint blue beneath the weight of their approach. The guards recognized Ronan. Their hands twitched at their weapons. But they didn't move. No one wanted to be the first to test a man who'd once survived the fall of Station Kiro. They entered the chamber as the crowd swelled. Alien nobles, officials, enforcers, and off-world diplomats watched with cloaked disgust as the exiled human and the hybrid girl brought in the governor's son like a trophy of war. Governor Dalton stood at the dais, his cloak flawless, his face calm, until his son was thrown at his feet, still bound, still breathing. Then finally, his composure cracked. Ilara stepped forward first. She didn't need Ronan to shield her now. Her voice was clear. You all watched them wrap a rope around my neck and said nothing. Some in the crowd flinched. You let a mob cry for purity over hunger. You let them use my life as a symbol, while the real thief walked free. Gasps, shifting feet. Dalton sneered. Do you come here to preach? You were judged. You were spared. And now you bring this mockery before a tribunal like we owe you something? I bring evidence, she said, and tossed the scroll forward. A Zeratai enforcer caught it mid-air and unraveled it. Counselor Threx read it aloud. Benel Dalton used override codes to access the ration vault. I saw him trade synth loaves for solar tokens. He threatened to erase me if I spoke, Mohammed. Mirith Glaive, Alara added. Kitchen worker, registry C-457. Your own niece's handmaid, Governor. Dalton chuckled coldly. The writings of a droid-bonded maid? You call that proof? A voice echoed from the side of the chamber. I call it confession. Heads turned. A woman stepped into the light, thin, pale, hands trembling, but voice steady. Mirith Glaive. She looked nothing like a fighter, but everything like the kind of person who watched the world break quietly until she couldn't anymore. She held up a second scroll. I wrote this too, the day after, and I brought this. From her satchel, she pulled out a data slate and a tattered bakery ledger. Benel accessed the vault 3 times using admin override. Look, dates match. So does the shortage. 100 loaves, logged and missing. The room stirred, whispers like insects crawling beneath skin. Benel spat blood onto the tribunal floor. Lies, all of it. Marith raised the slate and played the footage. There he was, caught on a maintenance camera he'd forgotten about, breaking the seal on the vault with his father's override key, dragging bags of Synth Loaf into a hovercart. And behind him, the brand mark of an outer ring smuggler burned onto a crate. Counselor Threx stepped down from his dais. He looked at Alara, then Mirith, then Benel. Finally, he turned to Dalton. You said justice demanded her death. You lied. Dalton's voice cracked. I acted with protocol. Then your protocols are rotten. The tribunal voted without ceremony. Benel convicted. Dalton, stripped of rank. Mirith, granted protection. Alara, absolved, fully. And Ronan? They tried to offer him reinstatement in the Earthborn military wing. He declined. There's something better than command, he said. Freedom. But the night didn't end in silence. It ended in fire. They returned to the shelter late, just before nightfall. Ronan stepped into the dark, then froze. Another lunged for her, but before he could strike, Ronan rose like a ghost from the snow and drove a fist into the man's face. The third man tried to run. Didn't get far. The last figure, the tall one, the one who had lingered behind the others, wasn't masked. Benel, blood dripping from his chin. Eyes wide. You think you've won? He growled. The system won't save you. Ronan grabbed him by the collar, slammed him to the floor, and twisted until snap. Benel screamed. You think I wouldn't come for you? Ronan whispered. You came for her. Now I've come for you. They bound him with rope. The same rope that once weighted around Alora's neck. This time it held the real criminal. Before dawn, they rode again. Elara walked beside the crawler, the letter clutched in one hand, a rifle across her back. Ronan sat tall in the saddle, bruised but unbroken, with Benel tied to the sled behind him. The wind screamed around them, but neither of them listened anymore. They wouldn't be silent. The morning of reckoning broke like silence shattered by a bell. The wind had calmed, finally, as if even the cold had paused to watch what would unfold. Ronan Vale stepped through the gates of the Verilian township, plasma boots crunching over frost-dusted steel. Behind him, the pack sled hissed on its hover coils, dragging a figure bound and bloodied. Benel Dalton. His hands were tied behind his back with the very same rope once meant for Elara's throat, frayed, frost-worn, and now red-stained with truth. Elara walked beside them, not behind, not hidden. She carried no weapon now, just a scroll, and the courage she had grown beside a man who never asked her to earn his protection. The streets filled with silence as people emerged, aliens and humans alike, all bundled against the cold, eyes narrowing at the sight of what they thought was long buried. They passed the old cryo-temple, the spot where she was almost erased. Elara glanced at it once, then turned away. That past no longer held her. At the center of the square, Ronan stopped beside the old stone pillar where notices of trials once hung. He stepped forward, raised his hand. They had a message to deliver, and rang the iron bell 3 times. Clang! Each toll cracked through the settlement like thunder across ice. And this time, clang, clang. Windows opened, doors creaked, breath plumed in clouds as people filled the square. And then, silence. Not forced, not fearful, expectant, waiting. Elara stepped forward. Wind kissed her cheeks, but she did not shiver. She lifted the scroll high. "You all saw me hanged," she began, "and you said nothing." Gasps rippled, murmurs. "You told yourselves it was justice," she said, voice louder now. "That a girl who took a ration she hadn't earned deserved to die in front of a temple built by people who no longer cared if you lived." She unrolled the scroll. "You almost let a lie kill me." From the crowd, a woman stepped forward, thin, worn, but unflinching. Marethglaive. She raised a second scroll. "I wrote this, the letter that exposed the theft, the truth you all ignored." She turned to the gathering. "I also brought this." She held up the battered bakery ledger. "It matches surveillance footage, dates, codes, all of it. The thief wasn't Elara." She looked at Benel. "It was the governor's son, and I kept silent because I was afraid." "Not anymore." Elara's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. "You said I stole. I didn't. But even if I had, is hunger now a crime worth death?" She raised her voice. "I took a loaf to feed a child, and for that, you wrapped a rope around my neck." A hush followed. Then, from the crowd, an elder alien stepped forward. His robes were tattered, his voice cracked with age. "We almost killed a girl for what a rich man's son did," he whispered. He fell to one knee. "I did not speak then, but I will now." Others followed. One by one, heads bowed. Some whispered prayers. Some wept. The old priest from the cryo-temple stepped forward last, his breath fogged in the icy air. "I did not bless you that day," he said, "but today, I kneel." And he did. Right there, in the snow, Governor Dalton shoved through the crowd. "Proof? You think scrolls and gossip are justice? She's a hybrid. She was marked since birth. You believe this human renegade over an elected official?" He pointed to Ronan. "This man was cast out. He is nothing." Ronan stepped forward, slowly. No weapon in hand, just a glove he had torn from Benel during the attack. He tossed it at Dalton's feet. "You want proof?" he said. "Here it is. His DNA's on it. His blood, his guilt." He looked up, directly into the governor's eyes. "I fought in the Gaian rebellions. I bled for humans and aliens alike. I've buried friends. I've buried my wife. But I've never buried the truth." He pointed to Benel again. Your son tried to kill a girl for being hungry. He raised his voice finally. So I ask you, who here still thinks she was the criminal? The answer came not in words, but in motion. A dozen townsfolk stepped forward and turned their backs on the governor. Others followed. Then someone shouted, "Resign!" Another voice, "Let them speak for us." And then, an eruption. "Send them packing. Let justice breathe. The rope should have held him." The governor's expression collapsed. By sundown, his resignation was official. He and Benel were escorted out of the settlement in silence. This time, no rope followed Alara. Only footsteps of those who stood beside her now. Weeks passed. The frost lingered, but something beneath it had begun to shift. At the edge of the ridge, the Vale Refuge stood tall. The geothermal shelter now expanded, its solar panels restored, its storage vaults restocked. The front sign, once rusted, had been replaced, painted by hand. Vale Refuge, where no one goes hungry, where ropes hang only lanterns. Alara stood beneath it, paintbrush still dripping in her hand. "Oh," Ronan approached, arms crossed. "You misspelled hungry in Varillian dialect." "I'm hybrid, remember?" She smirked. "I mix everything." He smirked back. "Fair." She lowered the brush. "You know, you said I'd leave one day." He nodded. "But I think I already did." He frowned slightly. She stepped closer. "I left behind the version of me who was waiting to die. I think I'm staying with the one who wants to live." He looked at her, slower this time. Measured, gentle, then handed her something small. A comb, finished. Not carved for someone lost, carved for someone found. That night the fire burned quiet and steady. The refugees they had taken in, 4 human children, 2 alien orphans, a cook and a broken-down translator bot, slept soundly in the far chambers. Ronan sat by the fire with parchment in hand, writing. The words were slow, uneven, but they came. "Liz, I failed you once. I let fear speak louder than love. I stayed quiet when I should have roared. But there was a girl in the snow. I saved her, not because I'm better, but because you taught me what love is, even if I only understood it too late. I think she reminds me of you, and that doesn't scare me anymore. Wherever you are, thank you. R." He folded the letter, walked to the cliffside peach tree where the ground had begun to thaw. He buried the letter gently at the roots. "Rest," he whispered. Later, Alara found him at the porch. She leaned beside him, wrapping his coat around both of them. "You still think I might leave?" He glanced at her, eyes tired but peaceful. "I'd never ask you to stay. But I think I already have." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They just stood there looking out at the frost plains, where beneath the last patch of snow, a single green shoot had broken through the ice. Untouched, uncrushed, still alive.